Welcome to the Jack Westin MCAT podcast with your hosts, Michael Maleka
and Molly Hudash. Welcome, everyone, to the Jack Westin MCAT podcast with your hosts, Mike and Molly. Super excited to talk about our topic for this episode, right? Which is all about using the AAMC resources. So if you missed it, last episode, we were really getting into the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of Anki and how to use it and use it properly, right? And we kind of ended on this point of, you know what? Practice questions are ultimately a phenomenal way to kind of keep all of this information in your head for retention, but also learn how to apply it. So I'm super excited to talk today about how and when to use these materials that are really the gold standard for MCAT prep.
Yeah, I'm sure, I know when I was, starting my MCAT prep, of course I went on Reddit. I was like, where should I get my resources from? What should I be studying? And, the first thing was, AAMC. AAMC is the gold standard. You gotta use the AAMC. And I'm like, what? What even are the
What is
AAMC
the
resources?
AAMC?
Who's the AAMC? I'm taking the MCAT. I don't know who the AAMC is, right? That's kind of what we want to talk about. And again, for those who even who have those resources, they kind of just throw so much at you. It's like, hey, here's all of this. Well, how should I be using it? When should I be using it in my prep? That's what we're going to talk about today. So that's why I'm super excited, because this is one, again, super common topic that we get asked. I know I do. I'm sure Molly does as well. So very, very excited, Molly, to talk about this.
Me too. And I love that you bring that up of when you're first starting, most people go to Reddit and you look at what do I need to know? Where should I get my resources? How should I be learning? And I remember when I very first started looking into this, you're right, I was looking at MCAT and I keep saying AAMC. I'm like, what is that? I had to Google it, right? It's American Association of Medical Colleges. It's basically the organization who writes the MCAT, right? So when you basically schedule your real exam, you'll do so on the AAMC website, right? So these are the people who make the exam. And if you're thinking, why is that the gold standard? That's why, right?
Yeah.
They're the ones who make the test.
Right.
So they release a ton of material, and we in the MCAT space call it the gold standard because, I mean, these are the people who write the test you're going to take that's going to go on to determine what medical school you can get into and residencies and so on and so forth. So super important.
Right. And I think it's they put out all these materials, but they've been putting out for years. And so I think there's some material where, because again, this exam has changed a lot. Over the last, 2015, there was a huge change. And then even in the last few years, I think there's been a change in how they've been testing. And so there's some resources that I think are the gold standard, that are extra shiny, diamond standard. And I think there's some resources that are gold. And so they're not all made the same, and that's why we want to talk about this episode, where it's okay, there's a certain order you should do these. But yes, absolutely couldn't echo more. Molly, they are the ones that make the exam, so you highly should be prioritizing. And so one thing that's also important is those resources aren't free. This is one thing where it is a paid thing. They do have, I think, 2 sample exams that are totally free to use. And again, we'll talk about how to use those. But they do have, the rest of the resources are paid. But this is one, and I think this, and this is kind of the standard in the entire MCAT space. If you're going to buy anything, these are the resources to buy, right?
Yes.
This is one thing where you can get by at different cost levels, but this is an absolute. And Molly, remind me, how much is the AAMC total package?
So I just checked, and as of the day that this episode was released, it is $310.25 for the official prep online only bundle. Good for 1 year. So about $300-ish.
Yeah. And so again, that's in different cost ranges. There are fee assistance programs. So if you do feel like you apply, you absolutely should look into fee assistance, because again, accommodation is huge for medical, entrance. And so absolutely, though, this is the one thing I think everyone needs for the MCAT.
Yes, for sure. And if you are in a particular situation of, I only have X amount of dollars to spend, there are definitely resources that we could prioritize in this episode if we do have a limited budget, if we aren't eligible for fee assistance, or maybe even the reduced cost is still seeming like a lot, we'll talk about, like you mentioned, which ones are gold standard versus diamond standard.
Mm,
Which ones are the most recently released, which ones are the most representative, right? There are definitely some resources in the mega bundle that you may not need,
hmm
right? And if you know that you're working on a very short timeline, you may not have time to use. That being said, the $310 bundle is a really good deal when you consider all the cost of each of the individual items. Like I think I went through this with another student that I was working with individually a couple months ago, and to buy a la carte all of the most representative materials, it was like $280.
mm,
So like you might as well, if you have the resources, spend
hmm
that extra $30 and get like almost twice as many questions. But we will talk throughout our chat today about which ones are the highest priority, so to speak, to make sure that you have done and reviewed thoroughly before you take your test. That being said, while we're on the topic of purchasing access, right? We should probably explain where to find them once you've purchased them.
Right. I know, like, especially when I'm walking through with students who purchased it, they're like, okay, I was told this is the gold standard, I need to get it. Then they're like, okay, where do I go to actually like use these? And we go to the AAMC and we're like, oh, I can't find it. So you need to go to the AAMC Prep Hub. Like, if you just type in AMC Prep Hub, the first link is what you're gonna find. If you just put that in Google, you put that in whatever search engine. Click on that, you'll sign in with your normal AMC login. Then you will see like everything come up, all the purple bars that have all the different resources. So the Prep Hub, AAMC Prep Hub, Prep PREP space HUB. That's where you're going to find your resources.
Yes.
Mhm.
So that's super important. Again, you really can't substitute the AMC. You know, we're not sponsored by the AMC or anything, but it really is something that everyone should have access to. Um, so while we're again kind of on this setting the stage discussion, let's make sure everyone knows what resources are included in this. And I say, I don't know about you, I think we should start with the most representative and most important and work our way down. What do you think?
100%, 100%. So, I mean, I could get started, right? In
Yeah,
my in my thoughts, the most representative is the sample exam. The sample exam is the most representative like piece of AMC material there is. I mean, what are your thoughts, Molly?
the sample test.
The sample test, the scored sample.
Oh, okay, there we go.
Yeah, the scored sample
So
test.
yes, now I
Yes,
agree.
yes, yeah.
There
So,
is
yeah, there's two samples. We
there are
should, yeah.
two frees. Just
Mhm.
to clarify, there's a sample test that's unscored, and then there's a free practice exam that is scored. So you're talking about the free practice
The
exam.
free practice exam.
Okay,
Yes,
yes, now
yes.
I agree with you.
That's you're like, wait a minute, the
Like,
unscored? No, no,
hold on.
the
There
scored
we go.
one.
Yes.
That is the most because I believe it was like an exam from 2023. Like again,
think
correct me,
it's I think it's
2022, 20.
2022, but it was
Yeah,
released in 2023.
exactly. That's the thing. And so it was a previous people took this exam. So if you
Hmm.
want the most up-to-date representation of today's exam, that's the place to go, right?
Yes.
What would you say is next? What would you say is like, all right, next on down, what's the next most representative?
So I feel like, you know, because we're on the topic of exams, right? You're right. 100% agree. The free practice exam is number one, right? That is royalty. That is the ultimate diamond platinum standard, right? Because it was real and because it's a very new resource, right? In the realm of exams, right? This is one of six that AMC puts out. There's four paid, and they call them exam one, two, three, and four. Those are all scored. And then there's another one that's free. That's the sample test. That's unscored. So I would probably say free practice is number one. And then I'd go four, three, two, one on
Mhm.
the scored exams. Again, you are getting a score. You don't have to use some online score calculator, right? It's going to tell you your score, your percentile, right, etc. I would say the lowest on the totem pole in the exam realm is going to be the sample test, because it's unscored and because I would say there's probably the widest gap in the difficulty between the sample test and the free practice of all the full lengths. That's just
Mhm.
my thoughts. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. As well, like with the unscored exam, it's still, and I always want to preface, like, are they just not going to tell me what's right and wrong? They will check, like, they
Yes.
will tell you, like, what's right, what's wrong. They just won't give you a scaled score. And we're
Yes.
going to talk about the scaled score, at
Yeah.
another time, but it just doesn't give you a score out of 528. It still gives you, like, out of 59 what it is. And it was so interesting because they made these changes, like, recently in the last few months where you used to just be able to go online and just get a score calculator. All the
Mhm.
score calculators are like behind email walls now, so you have to like sign up for the web.
What?
I know they made this change. I'm like, oh, now it's so I have to sign up, and now
Wow.
I'm gonna get on an email list. It's the worst thing. But again, there's a lot of like just an experience. Like I've seen these scores like a million times at this point. Like you can sort of tell like, okay, what kind of score range this is gonna be. But like yeah, but that's usually, and again, we'll talk about the order. This is usually the one you sort of want to do first. But
Yes.
again, we'll talk about the order in a little bit. But yeah, one of the biggest things is there's a good order, there's a right order to do this. And the unscored exam is definitely of the 6 exams that you have from the AMC, the first of the 6 you want to be doing.
Yes, for sure. Also, you made me feel so old earlier. I feel like we're like MCAT grandparents.
Us?
Like
What?
because well, because we've been studying for so long. Like
Oh,
you
that's
took your
true.
test in 2020, right?
2020. Yeah.
I'm 2021. So,
Hmm.
and obviously we've been teaching these for years and years and years. So we've been so connected to all of the new developments and the AMC materials and the changes in the exam over the years. But, it's so funny thinking of how many people are starting their journey today and how we are in comparison like MCAT grandparents.
Yeah, no, now see, I wasn't feeling old before, but like,
But now
thanks,
you
Molly.
are.
I'll
Good.
be
You're
thinking
welcome.
about that for the rest of the evening. So thank you.
That now lives in my head rent free.
Oh, yeah, amazing.
Yeah. Okay. So
Anyway.
I would say exams, number one, most important. We'll get more into how to take each one and when to take it later, even how to interpret your score later. That'll be a future episode.
Mhm.
I would say below that, and kind of just barely, is the section bank, right?
Mhm.
Section bank is a huge Q bank for sciences. There's no cars material in the section bank, but it's a giant collection of passages and questions from each science section. Section Bank Volume 1 has been around for years, but they just released Section Bank Volume 2, right? Like at the end of 2024. This is
Yeah, yeah.
brand new.
Mhm.
So that is sitting pretty close to the free practice exam, that scored free exam from the AAMC as far as representativeness, right? Because
Mhm.
that's very recent, even more
It,
recent than free practice.
yeah, and and it was interesting. I actually had a student of mine who he had taken the exam before, and when we were doing the section bank volume 2, he was like, "Oh, I've seen these questions before. These were questions from a full length from last year." Right?
Whoa,
And this was not something like I heard like released anybody, but he was like, "Yeah, no, I've definitely seen these questions before. They were on my exam." And so like this was something I was like, I didn't hear about this before, but like he was very like, "I've seen this." So
that's
again, in
awesome.
talking about representation, you're so right. Section bank volume 2 probably is going to be like under the full length exams because again, there's something to be said about the setting of a full length exam.
Yeah.
Section bank volume 2 is right there, and then I think just underneath that is volume 1.
Yes, I would agree. Right. And there are a lot of other resources. I would say Section Bank and the exams are part of those platinum,
Hmm.
diamond level or standard, right? Very,
Right?
very important. There are others, right? And I feel like we can move through these ones a little bit quicker, right? Like
Sure.
we have the independent question bank that used to be called the flashcards way back when when we were taking our test
Oh, going
as
back.
when you whippersnappers were still completing
In
your undergrad. Those used to be the flashcards. Those are all just multiple choice questions, no passages. They literally used to be printed onto flashcards. There's the official guide, right? Which is like if you buy the print and online bundle, you'll get a physical copy of the official guide. There's like a printed full length in there. That's also on the online version. So that one's a shorter version of the exam. You could take it like a half length if you really want to. Um, those are two that are kind of mid-tier, right? Um, Cars diagnostic tool as well. Very, very valuable. And then we have this kind of slightly lower tier in the question
slightly
packs.
dustier gold. Dustier gold.
Yeah.
Still gold, hey, still gold. Just a little
Yes.
bit dustier. And that's the question packs, right? And like, why do we call them dustier gold, Molly? Want to say that?
Well, as you explained earlier, right, the AMC has a lot of resources that have been posted, at different time points in the history of the MCAT. So the MCAT went under some pretty large structural changes in 2015. And the question packs, there's a physics, a chem, two bios.
Hmm.
That's it, right?
And
And
the
cars,
cars technically is within that, but yeah.
but the cars Q
Cars
packs
is
are pretty
gold.
good.
Cars is gold. Cars is gold.
Cars,
Yeah, those
cars,
ones gold.
QPAC, and
The sciences
diagnostics,
are
those are all
dusty.
good, right? But the science, so the bio volume one, bio volume two, physics and chemistry question packs, those are in the pre-2015 exams.
Mhm.
So they're not the most representative, I would say.
Yeah, I think they have there's like a bias. You can definitely like see like looking through the question packs versus comparing them to the sh section banks, like the difference in priorities between the different exams. I think those question packs are very, I think like content focused, like not
Yeah.
really passage analysis focused, very much like do you know the information, which again like is valuable in a degree, but again
Yes.
doesn't have that representative like you got some dense passage and then you have to extract the information, really great strategy application
Yeah.
as say the section banks or the
Yeah.
full-length exams do. But
Yeah.
no, definitely great practice for content-wise at least.
Yes. And that
Mhm.
kind of brings us to the topic of our episode, which is now that we all know what resources are out there, and of course, we'll also bring up some other free resources you have available to you. We've got 6 exams that we release for free. We've got a huge question bank of a variety of different types of passages. But you are now in this sea of resources,
Mhm.
right? Our goal in this episode is to help you figure out when should I be taking these different resources, these different passages and questions and exams, and how should I review them? How should
Mhm.
I take these questions? What should I be getting out of it? All that good stuff.
Yeah, I think I want to like preface it in the context of like phases of the prep because I
Yeah,
think in
that's a good
test
idea.
prep there's like some distinct phases and like when I say these phases, it's not like you go from one phase to another and you switch like it's like a 180 flip. These are very blended, so it's like one
Yes.
bleeds into two, phase two bleeds into phase three, and like the first phase I think is kind of the first phase everyone goes through it, and I think a lot of people spend too much time in, which
Yeah,
is
me too.
the content phase, right? This is where you've just got to acquire the information. Like again, this is an exam, and this is a controversial take. I don't think there's that much content on this exam. I don't genuinely think that.
Yes.
In comparison to what, like, if you're taking this exam, what the future holds for you, right? Like,
Yeah,
in terms of this exam, what we kind of talk about here is that this is not a content exam, it's really a strategy exam. But
agree.
content is foundational, right? If I were to split it up by an arbitrary percentage, I think your success is like 30% content, 70% your strategy, but you still need the 30. So the
Yes.
first phase is you need to start getting the content under your wing. So this is where you crack open whatever materials like here at JW, we've got so many resources. We've got our asynchronous course. If you're not somebody who likes textbooks, but there are all sorts of places that you can get your information from. And this is that first phase where, you're just getting that stuff. And so what are your best advices, like, for like how we to know when to switch to the next phase? And what is the next phase, Molly?
Yeah, that's a really important question because, like you said, a lot of people spend too much time in this phase because they don't know when to move on. So I'll share a personal, maybe something a little embarrassing of Molly when she took her test, right? Because I mean, when I took my exam, right, I got a 98th percentile score, right? But when I took it, I did not know 98% of the content, like not even close, right? I felt very seen and called out when you said this is not a content test because I really did not have a you know, perfect understanding of this material. I think a lot of people have this idea of, those of us who have scored 95th and above percentile, like, oh, they must just be walking encyclopedias. Like they must know everything. They must be able to describe in detail every step of every possible pathway and cascade on the MCAT, every, physical interaction between atoms. Like, no, you need enough to understand the passage and enough to make judgment calls in the answers, right? So I think, like you said, a lot of people spend a little too long here. And for that reason, it's very important to be doing passages throughout your content phase, right? So if we, I guess, kind of just break it down in this way, if we think about this on a deeper level, what kind of resources from AMC or from JW or whatever, right? What do you think we should be using in the early stages of our prep?
I think the first thing not to do is not to use the AMC right away. Like I think that's like
Wait,
sorry,
the first
I
thing
use a
not to
double
do is
the first
not to
thing to
use.
do. No, no,
Okay, there we go.
let me take a
Okay.
step back. I use my double negatives, my car's brains activate. Okay. So let me take a step back. The first thing to do is not to use the AMC resources right
There
away.
we go.
Yeah, there we go. So we're straight up now. Because, and this is a mistake I see all the time because, like we said, like some of these AMC resources are like diamond or like gold. You know, I
Yeah, they're
saw this one
so.
representation of them as like a fine wine, where it's like
Mm,
you need to be able to
mm,
appreciate these. But the problem I see a lot
yeah,
of the times is where we try to dump into the AMC resources way too early, or we don't have the practice. Like we haven't seen enough passages, we don't have the foundation, so we can't appreciate the value that these AMC resources have. So it's
I
like,
love that.
yeah, drinking wine before you know. So we need to get like not only the content, but also the strategies, the reps in, so that you can actually use those to the fullest potential. And so therefore, yeah, you're loving that. Have you ever heard the
So
wine
so
person?
you're telling me to drink boxed wine before I indulge in the
Well,
fancy wine.
you've got to ease into it. Exactly. You've got to
Yeah,
appreciate the box wine for what it is before we start getting into the great stuff. And so this
yeah,
is where like I love bringing in like those resources that aren't AMC, like our Jack Weston resources. Not to say like the comparison is boxed wine to fine wine, but this is where these resources, first and foremost, are totally free. I've seen students spend like hundreds of thousands of dollars on practice materials, practice resources before they've even looked at won't cost them anything. And being cost conscious is huge. And so we have, I think, over what 9,000 questions, like different types of questions. We've got the fundamental passages and the AMC style. So let's break it down what those
yeah,
are. Those
yes,
fundamental, we have fundamental passages, and these are passages that are focused on a specific topic. Because one thing
mhm,
about the AMC is they love mixing in topics. In a single passage, you might get a little bit of electrochem, you might get a little bit of heart cardio, and then you might get a little bit of circuits, all in the same passage, right? But when you're practicing, when you're starting out, that's overwhelming, especially if you haven't covered all of these things. So when you're starting out in the content phase, it's very important that you start doing passages, but using our Jack Weston fundamental ones, where
yeah,
if you just learned electrochem, go to our fundamental passages and look up a passage on electrochem and then do that passage so that it's focused more on that specific topic so you can see how it's presented in a passage-based style, right?
yeah.
That's, I think, one of the best places to start using materials and to actually get practice in during that con phase. That's why I like saying it bleeds in, right? It's not just
Mhm.
reading books, like in reading, you're actually practicing. Like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it's incredibly important not just to get a diverse, like, diverse exposure to content, right? Like, yeah, you get it from a textbook, you get it from one of our lectures, whatever, right? But you need to know, do I understand this enough that I could get a question right?
Mhm.
Because can I regurgitate a topic or a fact is a very different question to can I succeed on an MCAT passage in this
Mhm.
topic, right? So
Mhm.
totally agree. Those fundamental passages are absolutely, those are gold, right?
In their
Those
own
are
way, like
gold
in
as
that very
well, right?
intentional way.
They're very focused, but it's basically it's kind of like having training wheels on in a way, right? Like you are being exposed to figures in signaling cascades and, value with unit soup like you will in an AMC passage, right? Just tons of stuff thrown in there in the passage itself, in the figures, etc. And you'll still need to use reasoning in those questions, but like you said, AMC likes to mix in a lot of different topics within the same passage, right? And question set. So it kind of takes that barrier away. All of the questions, as well as the passage, will be focused on one thing. So that is the perfect training wheel scenario to start getting passage practice in that content phase. Now, you can also work in the question packs as you get further into your path or to your content phase practice. Like if you know that you've covered the vast majority of physics concepts, for example, go ahead and do the question packs, right? They're very focused. They're just not sorted like our Jack Weston question bank is. So you can't go in and say like, okay, let me look for an electrochem passage like you can on our website, right? Which by the way, if you just go to the homepage, there's a section for or a tab for it on the left, right, for question bank.
Mhm.
But you can absolutely use those question banks on the AMC website, right? The physics, bio, and chem question packs, kind of as content phase progresses,
Mhm.
right? The other thing that I want to mention in that early stage is cars.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to talk about cars too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, you could do the question packs first and then the diagnostic. I think that's actually what Jack recommends.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a pretty strong resource. But all the practice materials for cars are pretty good, wouldn't you
Mm-hmm.
say?
Yeah, I would say I think like here's my personal thoughts. I normally actually like doing the cards diagnostic first. And here's my reason. Here's my reason. In the diagnostic, there's some passages that are longer than 7 questions, right?
Mm.
And so like
Longer than 7?
there's a 10 question passage in the cards diagnostic.
Oh,
And
wow.
and it's like little things like that, or it's like they're not really like that's not representative of like a real exam or a real cars passage. And so normally what I usually recommend is to use the cars diagnostic as a diagnostic, right? Where like you kind of put yourself in that scenario where I'm gonna go through this car's diagnostic, not right away, but at least like earlier on, so you can feel what it's like, right? And then use those question packs like as you're progressing. And again, while you're doing that, using the Jack Weston cars passage, like that's probably what we're most like famous for, to be honest. Like
Mhm.
our really representative cars passages. And so using those after you've taken the diagnostic. But again, that's my take, like based on like my experience. But I mean, Jack has so much experience as well. So if he says to do it the other way, like again, like his reasoning, I'm sure there's a reasoning for that. But that's just like my take because there was that just one or two passages that are like that.
Yeah.
So I like getting them out earlier rather than later.
I feel like with cars, you really can't go wrong as long as you're not straying far from AMC, which AMC alone has so many cars passages between all their exams, the diagnostic, and the 2 question packs. It's a lot. And Jack Weston. Again, like you said, that's really how Jack Weston started was cars. We're very well known for cars. And we've got a ton of very high level car strategies in our courses and everything. Like that's definitely something that we do very well. It's also the section that I think 90% of third party test prep resources do really poorly. So
Hmm.
as long as you don't stray far from AMC is the platinum standard, Jack Weston as the platinum gold, right? As we start getting further from those two, we
Mm.
start getting into the dusty resources that we
Yeah.
mentioned earlier. I don't think that everyone does cars well, right? So just keep that in mind. That being said, diagnostic, it's a big resource. It's not like a diagnostic exam section, like 9 passages in 90 minutes. There's a lot. It's
Hmm.
multi-part, and there are so many passages in there. The question packs also have a ton of passages. You can come in and start working on these. I recommend early on, just start chipping away. Do a passage a day, right? Maybe every week as you get closer to test day, maybe you try and add an extra passage on a day or two of the week, right? Maybe you're doing one for most, but maybe one of those days in that week, maybe you do two, right? Or
Hmm.
maybe you're doing two, and maybe one day of the week you want to try 3 in a row. Start just easing your way in with cars, but start it early,
Hmm.
please.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think yeah, like a big point is that you really can't go wrong with like the order of the AMC. Like at the end of the day, like when we're talking about
Well,
like
for cars,
for cars,
cars.
yes, in the cars conversation. Again, I really need to make sure I preface in the cars conversation. Yeah, like we
Yes.
were talking about that in the sciences. There's definitely an order in cars because they're all, and I think this is something that like I get asked a lot. Like, oh, what passages should I do? Like, you really can't like go
Yeah.
wrong as long as you're doing a passage with proper strategy, like
Yes.
with a game plan, with an intention, right? I've met so many students who've done every single AMC passage, every single Jack Weston passage, every like so many third party passages, and they still struggle with cars. And so it's not just about like doing them, but having a strategy, being really intentional. I mean, that's what we're famous for at JW, and we're gonna go into cars, like have a whole episode dedicated to cars at some point in the nearish future, I think, and we're gonna
Yes.
talk about strategy and all that. But I think when it comes to AMC materials and Jack Weston materials, like that's what you should be sticking to. There's not an incorrect order, as long as you're kind of sticking to that strategy.
Yes.
Hmm.
And again, it's all free. We even
Hmm.
have cars practice exams that are not a that are beyond the 6 full lengths that have cars in them. Like there are actually specific 9 passages, 90 minutes, cars practice exams that are on top of the dailies that we have, the huge cars Q bank, and then also, again, the cars sections in the 6 exams that we release for free. You don't need to purchase access to anything else. This is expensive enough already with AAMC, right? You have so much available to you for free, so definitely check it out. So as we're kind of maybe progressing through our content phase, getting closer to taking the training wheels off, what I would recommend is as you're kind of testing out of that content phase or as you've been going for a while, I love to use the flashcards here or the independent question banks personally because it's just a bunch of standalone multiple choice questions. They're organized by subject. So there's a chemistry one and a bio and a psychology and sociology and a physics, etc. I think it's 25 questions in each, 25 or
Each,
30.
yeah, 25 or 30. I'd have to look back. Yeah, I'd have to double check.
I think it's 25. But really nice, just standalone questions that cover a wide range of material from those subjects. So I personally love it as kind of a way to quickly analyze how am I doing in terms of the content here. It's content, there is reasoning on it as well, but it's kind of a nice transition into, okay, I'm ready to really hit the gas with practice and start to integrate more of these tougher, more representative AMC materials. I've got my base level of content knowledge and I'm ready to build on it, right? That's our next phase.
Yeah, which is like phase two is like the practice phase, right?
Yes.
Where this is where you go from the fundamental stuff to more like AMC style. So this is where if we were to do like talk about Jack Weston resources, this is where you kind of switch from those fundamental to AMC style passages. That again, because at this point, you've seen the content. You know there's nothing at this point that should be foreign to content head wide. There's might be these
Yeah.
like little like tiny little aspects and that's not our goal. Like again, this is not a content exam. But now you have enough knowledge to tackle every single passage,
Yeah.
right? And so Jack Weston AMC style passages is where I like to start. It's where, okay, now again, we're taking the training wheels off just a little slower, right? So where
Mhm.
we're starting with those, right? We're getting our feet a little wet there, and then going on to those AMC style passages. And here is where personally I like assigning a full length exam. Just one. Like not start like doing them weekly or bi-weekly, but just doing one. Just to see like, okay, I've finished my content, right? I've done a few passages at this point. Let's do an exam to see where we're at. Right.
Which exam would you suggest at that time?
It really depends if the unscored has already been taken or not. Like if you started this process with the unscored AMC sample exam, then like okay, then at this point I would either do one of our Jack Weston exams or AMC full length one, right?
Yeah.
Those are probably at this point if you haven't taken the unscored. Or if you have taken, apologies. If you haven't taken the AMC unscored exam, this is the time to take the
Yeah.
AMC unscored exam. So
Yeah.
those are kind of your options. Like this is where you use that material, an exam at this point, so that when you are going through that practice phase, you have in the back of my mind, like I've taken a full length exam at this point. It's different, right? It's so different from like when you're just sitting and doing passages because there's a time pressure. There's these sections. It's long. So that's where I kind of like getting my mindset right there by starting at that point.
I think so too, especially because like, the content phase, I always like to think of it as like content is a prerequisite for success on the test.
Mhm,
They are not testing your content preparedness on the MCAT, right? Like you have to know at least the fundamental, concepts of each subject that is on the MCAT, obviously. But the real question is, can you think critically? Can you reason? Can you interpret data? Can you narrow down and use process of elimination? Can you step aside, especially in cars, and reason only with what's in the passage, right? It's testing your critical thinking and your adaptability, right?
mhm,
How well can you adjust to this new exam format? So I think that taking an exam right
mhm,
at the start of this process is wonderful because in my eyes, it helps you stay focused on
mhm,
what the goal is. Like, oh yeah, I'm doing this. I'm taking these passages because this is what I'm preparing for, right? This marathon of an exam, right?
mhm,
With all of these passages. Like, if I can do these all individually, my next thing is I just need to stack them. I just need to make sure I can do 10 passages back to back with discretes in the middle, right? You know exactly what your goal is, what you're training for essentially in this practice phase. So
mhm.
Completely agree, right?
Hmm.
Take the sample if you haven't already, or if you have, AMC one is fine, right? Or you could use one of our Jack Westons.
Yeah.
And you could start integrating these exams a little early, especially our Jack Weston exams, right? You got 6 of them. You could
Right.
start integrating those as well.
Yeah, a problem a mistake I see sometimes is that taking exams too late. Like
Yeah.
I see students all the time like try to cram exams like in the last like all the exams in the last like month, right?
Yeah.
Where oh my goodness, right? Like you have again 6 AAMC exams, 6 Jack Weston full lengths. Again, you don't have to do all these exams. But, like I can talk from personal experience. Like I did like 11 exams before my
Yeah.
own exam. Like really putting myself in that scenario. We talked about that. Like I think this was an episode 1 or 2 when we were talking
Mhm.
about the tips, like about putting yourself in that test scenario. But
Yeah.
so you need to like kind of like make a plan and not start too late, right? That's why
Yeah.
again I like taking that first exam once you've completed that like content, or even again based on your timeline, like even if it's like a week before you finish your content, like if you've done the bulk of your
Yeah.
content done, but again that's very timeline dependent.
Yeah. And I'm in an interesting situation. I know you took 11. I actually only took the 5 from the AMC. The
Really?
thing that is different, though, from the way that I did it from how most students do it, and again, I'm not necessarily suggesting people do this. I know better now, although all I could afford at the time was the AMC. So, what I did was I did the 5 AMC that were available at the time. This is pre-free practice exam, but I started earlier, right? Like my exam phase started probably 2 months before my test. I did
Mm-hmm.
one, I took a full 2 weeks to review and then do targeted practice. And then I took another one. I waited another 2 weeks and took another one. And then I got into my rhythm of 1 week until my test. So
Mm-hmm.
I started earlier still, but I just spaced them out more. Now, if I were redoing this or if I was making suggestions to students, now there are so many resources that weren't available to me that now they are available to you guys. Part of why I love being here so much is keeping high quality resources, open access to help people out that are not willing or able to be paying an arm and a leg for these practice materials, right? But start early is the idea, regardless of how many exams you have. And with Jack Weston, you have 12 available to you. Start early and make sure that you are intentionally reviewing them and adjusting your game plan, right? Here, we're still in the practice phase, but we're getting ready for the exam, essentially drills, like exam boot camp. That's the phase after. But Mike,
Mm-hmm.
maybe you could recap what are the resources that you recommend we complete before moving into exam boot camp?
Mhm. Yeah, I think first and foremost the unscored exam. Before you get an exam boot camp, that needs to be done either at the very beginning of your prep or at the end of content phase.
Yeah.
What needs to be done at this point, I think the question packs, like the question packs before you get into exam boot camp, need to be done. The flashcards or the independent question bank, like those
Mhm.
need to be done. Again, I say need to be done, but again, in terms of your practice, should be done. As well, the official guide, like the official guide, like those questions from the official guide to the exam. Again, not a lot of exam of questions there, but a good like half diagnostic, but also good practice to do before
Yeah.
you get into. This is where, again, probably in our retrospect, the dusty gold, right, is where I probably have get done before that exam boot camp phase.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree. And just in case we have any listeners out there who are like, well, Molly and Mike, I'm taking my test, in 6 weeks and I haven't
Mhm.
touched the AMC materials at all, right? Just to clarify, before we make our way into exam boot camp, which everyone should do that. No question. If you have not taken AMC 1, 2, 3, 4 and the free practice, please do not schedule your test. Right? You need to have taken those. Please, please, please,
Mhm.
please. If you are really in a rush and pushing back is not an option, I would say personally, the ones that I would put on that lower tier and maybe don't require you to take, right, would be the question packs. That's the big one. Some of the other ones I think are really useful. The official guide and the independent question bank, especially, like I would really prefer you did those. But if you are 6 weeks out, you need to focus on exams, right? I'd rather have you do those and the section bank and review them really thoroughly than do more questions but review worse, right? So
Mhm.
those for me are my set aside like please do these, but if life happens and it's not possible, I don't think that not having done these should mean you can't take your exam.
100%. And this is going to be something I don't really share this often, but when I was
Hmm.
going through my prep, I did not do them. Like for my prep, I did not use the Dusty Gold
Which
resources.
ones? Which ones?
I didn't use the question pack at all.
Okay.
I used a little bit. I used the section bank, volume one. There was no volume two. And I used some of the cars question pack. Like I used the cars question packs, but I didn't really touch the science question packs much.
Yeah.
But again, like they are good practice, but like for in my mind, I was doing so many practice problems from like other resources. Like I was using between like Jack Weston resources, between I had I had like some third party resources as well. I was just doing so many exams that was like exam review, targeted
Yeah.
practice, exam review, where I that was not my priority. And I mean, they're good practice, but they're not like the most like
Yeah.
necessary. But I mean, I think that gets us into like phase three, right? We've talked about phase one, which was the content phase. Phase two, you've done an exam now. You're getting really getting get that those reps in, AMC style passes from JW, the Dusty Gold resources from the AMC. Then you get into phase three, which is exam boot camp, which is, exam weekly if you can. Like this for if you're a full-time studier, I would probably recommend weekly, bi-weekly if you're a part-time studier, right? This is where you're
Mhm.
taking exam bi-weekly, giving yourself an opportunity because you're not studying full time to take an exam, but it's regular exams. During this
Yes.
phase, like again, time dependent on how many resources you have and what your timeline is looking like in general. This is where you're doing those exams regular and you're starting to use the platinum resources. I mean, talk to me,
Yes.
Molly, where would you start in terms of your exam phase?
So I really like to start full on boot camp 6 to 8 weeks out. And again, it
Mm,
depends on your schedule. If you have fewer hours per week, I'd start closer to the 8 weeks. If you have more time, I'd start closer to the six, right? But I don't like starting this sooner than the 6 weeks, right?
mm,
Like you need at least 6 weeks, in my opinion, right? And that's because ultimately we want you to do at least the six AMC exams, right? Really, the sample test, the unscored one, should be done already, right? So you've got five to take and thoroughly review, right? Plus, again, you have more. You have six additional free Jack Weston exams, which is why, if you have the time, start at 8 weeks out, right? Do an exam a week every week leading up to your test. I want to just comment real quick. If you are someone who's maybe a part-time MCAT studier, right? Maybe you have a lot going on. You can take an exam every other week for the earlier phases. That's what I did, right? I shared that I only took the five AMC exams that were released in 2021. So the sample and the four numbered exams. Um, I started one, took another one 2 weeks later, took another one 2 weeks later, and then I moved to one a week. I do recommend, regardless of what your schedule is, the last 4 weeks leading up to your test, you really should be doing a test a week,
mm,
right? If that means organizing your schedule a little bit so you can make sure to have more time in that phase, it's worth it because
mm.
you want to get in the rhythm. Like you want this to feel like muscle memory, right? So that it's just another exam.
It's just another exam.
Yeah. And
Right.
taking it every other week, like, you know, you have your real exam and the most recent you took was 2 weeks prior. I don't think that's often enough in those very late stages to fully get everything out. What do you think?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it really like I think for some people it's just hard because I think if you can't get the review of that exam,
Yeah.
like it would be hard for somebody who's like because I work with people who are like full-time nurses who have children,
Yeah.
right? Like if they're in
Yeah.
that
You can't
scenario,
sacrifice the review.
you can't sacrifice the review. And I think if you're taking it every single week and you're not studying full time, like you will not have had a chance to really capitalize on that review before you take that next exam. So I think it's
Yeah.
like for the most part, for most people, I 100% agree. Like in that last month, 100% weekly. But there are like niche scenarios where again, I'm
Yeah.
visualizing students I've worked with where they're like they can't. Like they can't be doing that. And again, so you just do the next best thing because hey, life
Yeah.
is life. But you do speak to one thing that is important that this exam should be a priority, right? Like I know a lot
Mhm.
of people I've worked with, again, you and I have worked with hundreds of students in the past, right? You know the students who are like, this is a priority, this is something I want, and the students who don't prioritize it, and like the effects that happen. But so highly recommend prioritize it as much as humanly possible. So yeah, in that last month, if you can, exam every week, if you can, is the preface.
Yeah.
And during the in-between times, you take an exam, you've reviewed it, you've done very targeted content. What are you doing in those days, like before you've taken your next exam?
Section bank, baby.
100%. This is the time, right? Because this is where you're gonna get really like representative practice, and this is the time to also be putting yourself in exam conditions during the practice, right? Like I
Yes.
know we talk about this all the time, like exam conditions. Like while you're taking passage practice and doing passage practice, there's no
Mhm.
music in your ears. There's no
Yeah.
water next to you. There's no snacks next to you. You're not in a loud place in a coffee shop. You are in exam conditions.
Yes. Yeah. That calls back to episode 2. If you guys haven't watched it, definitely go do it. We talk all about how to simulate real test environment. So you'll have to go check that out if you haven't already. But yeah, in the realm of the section bank, I'll offer one more thing that I did because I only had 5 exams at the time. I did a crazy thing. And I took 50 questions from, section bank is 100 questions in each section. I divided each one in half and I did
It's an exam.
half of it as a practice exam. So I was like, okay, section bank is very difficult. And
It is
just
hard.
for anyone who's newer to the section bank, these are like the hardest passages that you're going to see, like a real full length. And I say this having been part and around of the team that made our full lengths, and I've seen these full lengths from the
Of course.
AAMC so many times. They have to be paced. Like you have a fair amount of like medium level difficulty questions. You have passages. You have a couple that are really hard, and then you have a couple that are like, okay, that wasn't so bad, right? They pace them and they distribute them pretty well. Section bank is like drinking from the fire hose of like all of the really complicated passages. Like maybe in a section of 10 passages, maybe like 3 or 4 of them are section bank level difficulty, maybe 4 or 5 if you get kind of a gnarlier test. But so I did 50 questions from the AAMC section bank, as each section of the exam, and then I did cars in between, and I took it under test conditions as a 6th full length. Not for the faint of heart, but
I'm gonna put on record. I would never recommend that to any. I'm like, oh my goodness. Imagine taking that a week before my exam, thinking like that's a
please don't do it a week
representative.
for your, no, no,
Yeah,
no, do
like
not take it a week before your exam. This is not for the faint of heart.
no.
But for me, I think I did it 3 weeks out. I was like, okay,
Okay.
if I can survive that,
Mm,
I could survive anything. And I really
mm.
did feel that way when I sat for my
Hey,
test.
honestly,
Like,
it's
you know
so
what?
real.
This is easier than my section bank exam. So
Mm,
you know, take it with a grain of salt. I mostly did that because I wanted to do extra exams.
mm,
And I didn't have them, which of course you guys have them. But sometimes it's almost exposure therapy. It's like there's
mm-hmm,
no way that I could take a full length that is harder than what I just did. I survived it and I learned so much from that review process. Because ultimately, like the actual experience of taking it was super uncomfortable, right? I
mm-hmm,
felt super out of my element, super tired, and it forced me to develop good test taking strategies that ultimately benefited me later. That
mm-hmm.
was also a thing in episode 2. So you'll have to go back. We
Gotta
talk
go
about
back and watch episode 2, I
testing those
guess.
strategies. Yeah, definitely super relevant here.
Mm,
But you're right, calling all the way back to what you were saying before of, don't if the way that you're experiencing life at the moment, if you're a full-time nurse or student or you're a parent and you're juggling too much, don't sacrifice the review, right? This everything that we've presented in this episode is like this is the best way to do it. This is the ideal flow. But again, like we've talked about, sometimes life doesn't align with what's ideal, right? So definitely in this process, you can take what we've shared here today and adapt it to what is going on in your life and try and see how you can take something from this and improve your study plan layout, right? Every single student has such a unique mosaic of life experiences and backgrounds and kind of just life conditions that they're experiencing while studying, and you really do need this to be adaptable to you, right? So if you are in that sort of situation, Mike, what would you suggest
mhm.
to a student?
If I were to, if I were to talk to me, like give myself advice, like I was like in that scenario, I'm like, I know, like I just listened to Mike and Molly, like we just walked through like the different ideal order, but how do I adapt it to my schedule? Like we recognize that, and that's why we have academic advisors at JW
Yeah.
that are totally free to talk to. Like you don't have to pay anything, you don't have to put in a credit card, where you can just talk to somebody who like knows this exam really well, like who can just hear your story and can give you recommendations as to your specific scenario.
Yeah.
Right, like because again, we these are guidelines, but like maybe you're somebody who you're like, I've been out of school for like 3, 4 years. Like maybe I need a
Mhm.
longer study period. When should I start? Like, what is the order should I do things? When should I move from phase one to phase two to phase three? Right, like these are things where it's so like tailored to the individual that a lot of the times I do recommend to talk to the advisors to like so that you can get maybe a little bit more tailored advice and maybe even talk to like we have like professionals here you can meet with like for 1 hour and they can really just kind of help set you on the right path. And so I normally would recommend talking to a professional, whether you have like a guidance at school or one of our Jack Weston advisors, because it's so such a personalized thing.
Yeah. I honestly tell students all the time that like I am tempted to call our academic advising team with just like I'm stressed and I don't know what to do because that's kind of what they're specialized to do is like
Hmm.
they know how stressful this process is and how unique every single student is in what they need and what they have time for and what they have capacity for, etc. Their strengths, weaknesses. And the whole goal is like, let me get to know you and let me help you figure out what you need to really make a difference in your prep, right? And sometimes I'm like, I just can't make a decision or I'm feeling overwhelmed, like, hello, academic advising. They're so sweet. They're so sweet. They're so helpful. Yeah, that's a great place to go if you are feeling like, okay, this advice was great. Mike, Molly, thank you for, just laying it out, but it doesn't perfectly apply to my situation, or maybe I'm not the idealized MCAT student, right? So if you want more personalized, one-on-one catered help, definitely chat with an advisor. And
Hmm.
you can access those or access our advisors on the homepage. Same as always. And by the way, if you're ever having trouble local or locating a resource that we mention, definitely reach out. You could leave it in the comments of the video if you're watching on YouTube, or you could also, when you open the homepage, there's a little like chat box in the bottom right corner, like a little chat function that'll
Bubble.
connect you with the support team. So you could
Hmm.
always just ask them if you can't find it. But there's a link to text or call a phone number on our website. It's 415-855-4435. So you could also text or call that, and that'll connect you with an advisor too, or help you schedule a meeting if that's what you want. So lots of ways to get involved. I hope you guys enjoyed our overview of how and when to use these resources. We will absolutely do, we've talked about multiple extra episodes so far.
Yeah, no, yeah,
We've got a
100%.
lot. We've got
So
a
the
lot.
next one though,
The next
MCAT
one, though,
scores. Hmm.
yes, because we've talked so much about full lengths, right? We want to make sure that you know how to unpack your score, how to navigate the AMC exams and our exams, and what the analytics look like in the different websites, how to interpret what it means to have a 504 or a 512 or a 528. Like, what does that actually mean? We'll talk all about that in our next episode. Again, we're kind of going through the MCAT basics. Like,
Hmm.
what do we need to know? We've also got a couple other pretty fun episodes on the horizon relating to cars and when to know how to take or when to take your real exam, etc. So stay tuned. Thank you guys for listening. It was an absolute pleasure to be here with you. And we can't wait to see you for the next one.
See you next time. Bye now.
Bye.